if someone's starting a business and they're outsourcing or they're building a team overseas, what are the principles they should follow to understand understand how to approach the culture that they're working with? Is there like a founding principles as opposed to like specific techniques?
Yes, I think always a great place to start is an appreciation that there are differences, right? So, firstly, is the awareness, okay, that there are differences. Because most times we go into a lot of things assuming similarity. So, if we assume there are going to be differences, that's not going to make me far more aware for a start. Secondly, it's really useful if I can actually understand what my own cultural values are, because all cultures look are ethnocentric, which means we use our culture as the center mark and we use our culture to compare others. Every culture does it, right? So as long as I understand that I'm ethnocentric, how do I learn to be ethno-relative? Which is, okay, how do I now learn to maybe appreciate different styles and different nuances? So you mentioned you're in Southeast Asia right now. Whereabouts are you?
Currently, I'm in Phuket, but I was in the Philippines for about a month before that.
So if you think about Phuket being in Thailand, right? The Thai culture, very gentle people, very gentle. Okay, it it is highly unusual for you to see an expression of anger among the Thais. Highly unusual because it is a very low value. Part of the value is harmony. Okay, it's high values. How do you create harmony in it? Now that doesn't mean people don't get angry. People do, but they don't display it. For instance, like you would in Australia, right? Like somebody cuts you off, you're annoyed with something, you call it out. But they don't do that in Thailand. So part of you in terms of your own cultural intelligence is okay. What signals do I use to understand if there is disagreement in with what I'm saying? If there's a different point of view, how do I invite that? Okay, how do I attune myself to it? Many years ago, I was working with a client who was an Australian person, and I remember him saying about his EA, who was Thai. He was based. He said, she came to me and she said how one of her close relatives had passed away, and then she started laughing. And he said, I couldn't get it, right? I said, what's wrong with this person? They must be fibbing. They must be giving me a story because they want to have, a day off or something. And one of the things I was explaining to him is that people show emotions in different ways. Like in certain cultures, to laugh is actually to be able to show sadness because I can't cry, right? Whereas we would expect someone to cry. So it's
Wow.
it's again kind of really understanding. So what am I basing it on, right? I'm assessing based on my own cultural lens. Is that appropriate and correct in this cultural context?
Yeah, wow. That applies to relationships as well. It applies to every aspect of life, like I think
Absolutely.
that and again, yeah, and the like so there's I think that what this really taps into is there's a disempowering way to look at this and an empowering way to look at this, right? It's like, oh, this person doesn't get it. They just don't understand, like they're not intelligent or this or that, or the other. Truth being told, it's like if you took the time to step back and being like, okay, what am I missing here? What are the key things that I need to know about X culture or Y culture? And how can I use that in my communication to understand? So an example that you spoke about there, it's like, and I want to relay it back to this other study that I read. I think it's David Buss, his name is, where he talks about what is high and low status in certain societies. And there's in Western cultures, yeah, different cultures, right? Cultures, and he says that in Western cultures, a sense of humor is like a really like a positive thing. A sense of humor, generally speaking, of course.
Yes. Yes.
But then in Asian cultures, it's not so desirable. In fact, it's probably actually a negative because they don't relate the same way.
Yeah.
So you have two choices, right? It's like, do you want to be, like get angry and frustrated, and then cycle through all these employees saying to yourself, they just don't get it, like they're not the same, or is it like, how are they seeing the world, and how can I make it so we're in harmony as opposed to friction?
That's correct. That's correct. So how do I broaden my own understanding of it? And humor is a really funny thing, look, because humor is culturally bound. So what is funny in one culture is not funny in another, which is why when people talk about jokes across cultures, really, really difficult to translate because it's all based on how I'm interpreting the words you're using. So this is a true story of someone who was a very important exec, went to Japan. He was from the US, went to Japan, and he was using a translator for the presentations, right? So he did his first presentation, and as is was his style, he started off with a joke. People laughed, right? And then he did his presentation, and then the next day he was doing the same presentation, but he had a different interpreter. He told the same jokes. No one laughed. So he thought to himself,
Wow.
this interpreter is not funny. Okay, obviously not able to translate my joke. On the third day, he had the translator from day one, the interpreter from day one. He told the same jokes and everybody laughed. And he said, okay, no, I'm back. He was wise enough to ask the question at the end of the presentation. He asked her, I said, how did you tell those jokes? Because yesterday, the interpreter wasn't funny, but when you say it, it's really funny. And she said, well, I say to the audience, the gentleman has just made a joke. Please laugh. Right? True story. So
Wow.
so I always caution my clients, don't use jokes. Humor is different. I'm looking for humor. And see, in the West, look at how so much of the humor is self-deprecating, right? Put myself down, make a joke of myself rather than but in lots of Asian cultures, if I self-deprecate, especially if I'm a leader or I'm a speaker, they look at you going like, well, you're supposed to be you're supposed to be the expert here. Like, what? Why? It's so it goes back to the hierarchy. So those things are the things that's important. Yeah.
And even sarcasm as well. Like for me, like my humor is sarcastic, and over here, like it doesn't. People are like, what are you talking about? It's like,
It
oh,
doesn't
you're serious,
translate.
and it's like
Yes.
for some people it does. Like obviously, there's we're talking about generals here, right?
Yes.
But generally
Generalizing.
speaking, like I'll yeah, it's like I'll I'll be sarcastic, and people are like, what are you talking about? So you have to learn the hard way, I think, unless you're willing to open your mind to it. So that's really, really cool. Thanks for watching this clip of the Getting Mental podcast. If you like this clip, check out the full episode here or more clips here.